I have learned not to trust the moments that arrive wearing ordinary clothes. The dangerous ones almost never announce themselves with noise. They slip in quietly. A delayed boarding call. A suitcase that feels too light for a long trip. A child who stops moving when an adult says her name. That night, it was a voice. Small, flat, careful. Not loud enough to make anyone turn around, but sharp enough to stop me in the aisle. The woman beside her had leaned in with the kind of patient smile strangers are supposed to admire. "Anna, sit back for me, sweetheart." The little girl did not move at first. She looked at the woman, then she looked at me, and in a voice so calm it felt wrong, she said, "I'm not Anna, I'm Alice." There are sentences that disappear the moment they are spoken. That one did not. It stayed there between us, hanging in the recycled air, too quiet to become a scene and too clear to forget. I remember the sound of the engines under it. I remember the pale cabin lights. I remember the way the woman's face changed before she smiled. Not shock, not confusion, adjustment. The kind that comes too fast. The kind that suggests a person already knows which version of events she plans to hand the room. She touched the girl's wrist with two light fingers and gave me a look that asked for understanding before I had offered any judgment. She gets confused when she's tired. It was a beautiful sentence. Soft, private, plausible. And I might have accepted it if I had not seen the child's face just before she spoke. I had seen frightened children before. I had seen spoiled ones, stubborn ones, overtired ones, children who said dramatic things because they wanted every adult nearby to lean in and negotiate. This was different. There was no performance in her, no wildness, no plea. She looked as if naming herself was not rebellion. It was maintenance, as if she were holding together the last true thing that still belonged entirely to her. By the time we pushed back from the gate, the cabin had the drained, stale mood delayed flights always collect. People were quieter than usual, though not calmer. Coats were folded badly. Phones were nearly dead. Patients had worn thin in the polite little ways people try not to show. Row 9 looked harmless. A well-dressed woman by the window, a little girl beside her, a neat carry-on tucked under the seat. A cardigan folded with such perfect care it seemed designed to reassure everyone around it. If you had asked me then, I would have told you they looked exactly like what passengers hope for on a late flight. Contained, tired, uncomplicated. But some rows feel wrong before they give you proof. Not because of what people do, because of what they do not do. The child sat too still. Not sleepy still, careful still. Her hands were tucked beneath her thighs, as if even resting them openly required permission. She did not lean toward the woman. She did not drift into her space. She did not reach for comfort the way children usually do when the world becomes narrow and dim and full of strangers. And the woman never touched her by accident. That was what I noticed first. No absent-minded hand smoothing her hair. No automatic brush at the shoulder. No unconscious tenderness. Everything between them looked arranged, neat, correct, almost convincing. When I came through with the first service, I watched the girl more closely. Children always reveal something around a cart. Hunger loosens them. Fatigue makes them careless. Even quiet children usually hesitate, change their minds, ask for juice, then water, then juice again. This little girl waited until I looked directly at her, and she turned to the woman beside her before speaking. Not in the ordinary way children seek approval. In the measured way of someone who has learned that even small choices can become expensive. Water, she said. The woman gave the slightest nod. No ice, the girl added. That was all. A tiny exchange. The kind most people would forget before the next row. But I remember the way she held the cup with both hands. Careful not to spill. Careful not to drink too fast. Careful not to leave any trace of herself larger than necessary. When she handed it back, she thanked me, not brightly, correctly. I have known children from strict homes. Children taught to behave in public. Children raised to fear embarrassment. This was not that. She was not trying to impress the woman beside her. She was trying not to trigger her. The difference is easy to miss if you do not spend your life watching people in contained spaces. Fear in children is rarely loud at first. More often, it arrives dressed as competence. A child who watches tone before meaning. A child who folds a napkin after touching it once. A child who keeps her shoes aligned beneath the seat as if disorder itself might cost her something later. That was what unsettled me. Not distress exactly. Restraint. The kind no child should practice so fluently. And once I saw it, I could not stop seeing the rest. Each time I passed row 9, the girl was watching the mothers nearby. Not openly. Not long enough for anyone else to notice. But long enough for me. A baby asleep on a shoulder across the aisle. A boy reaching for his mother's sleeve 2 rows ahead. A woman tucking a blanket beneath her daughter's chin. The child beside the window watched them with an expression I could not name at first. It was not envy. It was not curiosity. It was recognition. As if she were looking at a language she used to speak. A little later, I stopped beside their row and asked whether the child wanted a blanket adjusted. Before the girl could answer, the woman smiled. She runs warm. When I asked if she had eaten before boarding, the woman answered that too. She never eats this late. Her tone was calm, gracious, never sharp enough to justify concern. That was part of what made it difficult. Most controlling people leave fingerprints. A tightening around the mouth, a warning look, an edge that flashes and disappears. This woman had refined herself beyond the reach of obvious mistakes. She answered quickly, but never rudely. She positioned herself as the most reliable witness in the row before the child had the chance to become one. Then, when the girl shifted slightly toward the aisle, the woman rested 2 fingers against her forearm and said, with the same composed smile, "Anna gets overstimulated when she's tired." Anna. Again? The girl lowered her eyes at once. Not in embarrassment, in recognition. As if she had heard that sentence before. As if she knew that once an adult says the wrong thing about you in the right tone, the room begins to accept the version that is easier to manage. I kept moving. What else could I do? That is the part people misunderstand about cabins. At 30,000 feet, certainty is a luxury. A child says one thing. An adult says another. There is no bruise, no raised voice, no direct plea, only instinct, procedure, and the terrible possibility of being wrong in public while a frightened child sits in the middle of it. So I did what flight attendants do when certainty refuses to arrive. I stayed near. I found reasons to return. An extra napkin, a quiet check on the temperature, a pass through the aisle that could be explained if anyone asked. The woman welcomed every interruption with effortless warmth, and that made her more troubling, not less. People who know they are being observed do not always resist scrutiny. Sometimes they charm it. Sometimes they invite it to relax. The child seemed to understand that I was watching. Each time I came back, her eyes met mine for a fraction longer. Not with hope. Hope is careless. This was something smaller and sadder. Measurement. She was trying to decide whether noticing was all I was capable of, or whether I might be willing to remember. Then the woman asked me for another pillow. I turned to hand it across. She bent toward the child with that same lovely, measured expression. "Anna," she said softly, "if you put your head down now, we'll be there soon." The girl looked at the pillow, then at the woman's hand, then at me. And this time, when she spoke, there was no hesitation at all. "I'm not Anna, I'm Alice." The woman did not flinch. That was the worst part. She did not laugh awkwardly. She did not look offended. She did not even pause long enough to suggest surprise. She only let out a slow breath through her nose and laid 2 fingers against the girl's wrist. Not gripping, not restraining, claiming, "She does that when she's tired," she said. Then she gave me a small, apologetic smile. "There's been a lot of confusion lately." It was the kind of sentence people trust because it seems to explain everything while saying almost nothing. Confusion. Lately, no details. No edges. No invitation to ask more. I looked at the child, expecting anger, embarrassment, some flicker of protest. Instead, Alice went still. Not the stillness of defeat. Something colder than that, the stillness of a child who has already learned what happens when truth is spoken in front of the wrong adult. That was the moment the flight changed for me. Not because I understood everything. I did not. But because I stopped believing I was watching an ordinary disagreement between a tired child and an exhausted guardian. Children forget toys. They forget sweaters. They forget which pocket they shoved a boarding pass into. They do not usually forget themselves. Not with that kind of precision. Not with that face. I kept moving through the cabin, but part of me remained in row 9. I checked the forward galley. I counted cups. I answered a call light near the rear. All the usual motions continued. But my attention kept circling back to the same row, the same child, the same wrong name being used with too much confidence. When I returned with no reason stronger than instinct, the girl had not relaxed at all. Most children surrender to sleep eventually. They slide sideways. Their heads tip. Their shoes twist loose beneath the seat. Alice was still sitting upright as if rest itself had become unsafe. The woman had a slim folder open on her lap. I caught only fragments as I passed. A typed page, a seal, a clipped corner of official paper. Then the woman noticed my glance and closed the folder with such smooth grace that I almost felt rude for seeing it. "We've had a difficult month," she said quietly. She's still adjusting. Adjusting. Another polished word. Adults in trouble love words that make harm sound temporary. The seatbelt sign came on not long after for a patch of rough air. The plane gave a quick, low shudder. A few passengers looked up. Ice clicked softly in plastic cups. Alice's hand moved to the armrest and stayed there, small and pale in the cabin light. The woman covered it immediately. Not hard. Not even firmly. Just enough to remind the child that even that inch of space belonged to someone else first. Alice did not pull away. She let her fingers go loose beneath the woman's hand. Then she looked across the aisle. A mother was half asleep there, her son draped over her shoulder, his mouth open, his whole body trusting her without effort. Alice watched them with an expression that went through me like cold water. Not longing exactly, something more disciplined. Longing that had learned to sit still. That was when I felt the shape of the problem deepen. Until then, I had been searching for inconsistency, for the obvious crack, for the thing I could point to later if someone asked why I interfered. But what I saw in her then was not random fear. It was homesickness, a careful, private kind. The kind no child should feel while sitting beside the person supposed to be taking her home. I started finding excuses to return more often. A refill no one had requested. A check on the temperature. A folded blanket over my arm. The woman accepted every interruption with the same perfect composure. Never irritated. Never defensive. Almost grateful. That was what made her dangerous. Some people do not resist scrutiny. They shape it. They make you feel ungenerous for having doubts. Alice noticed me each time. Once, when the woman bent to reach inside her bag, the child looked straight at my name pin, then at my face. Not pleading. Memorizing. It lasted less than a second. Then the woman sat upright again, and Alice's eyes dropped at once to her lap. No child becomes that efficient at disappearing in a single evening. That thought sat in me heavily. Whatever this was, it had started before they ever boarded. Later, when most of the cabin had settled into that dim, suspended silence only late flights know, the woman chose her moment. I was collecting cups from the forward rows when she looked up and said, almost reluctantly, "I'm sorry about earlier." Her tone was so reasonable that for a second, it almost made me ashamed of my own suspicion. Then she lowered her voice. "There's been some family stress," she said. "A difficult custody situation. Too many adults pulling in different directions." She paused, just long enough to let sympathy enter the space. Different names get used in different homes. She gets confused when she's tired, especially after visits. After visits. The phrase landed cleanly, like it had been used before. Not improvised. Placed. It brought law into the conversation without offering anything I could verify. It suggested history, paperwork, legitimacy. I asked whether there was anything the child needed to make the rest of the flight easier. The woman's smile softened. "Just consistency," she said. "That's what her father and I are trying to give her." Her father and I, not her family, not we, not the people who love her. Her father and I. It was a tidy sentence. Too tidy. Beside her, Alice stared at the dark window. Her reflection hovered faintly in the glass, small and solemn and almost transparent. I waited for her to interrupt, to say no, to say, "My mother calls me Alice," to say anything. She said nothing. And somehow that frightened me more than if she had cried. The woman kept speaking in that same low, elegant tone. How transitions were hard. How children cling to old routines. How everyone was doing their best. Every sentence sounded reasonable. Every sentence sounded practiced. And all at once, I understood what had been wrong from the beginning. She was describing a child's life with authority, but not with tenderness. She spoke like someone who had studied the case, not lived inside the love of it. That was the second shift. The first had been the name. This was worse, because now I could hear the machinery behind it. Not panic, not confusion. A narrative, one repeated often enough to become smooth. One designed for teachers, gate agents, courtrooms, neighbors, anyone who preferred calm explanations over troubling questions. And sitting beside her was a little girl learning, in real time, what happens when the adult with the paperwork also gets to control the language. By then, I had stopped thinking Anna was a mistake. Mistakes are uneven, human. embarrassed. This was none of those things. She used that name too cleanly, too consistently, as if repetition itself could make it true. And every time she said it, I saw the same change in the child. The first time, correction. The second time, silence. The third time, calculation. She was no longer deciding whether the name was wrong. She was deciding whether defending the right one was worth the cost. After that, nothing in row 9 felt ordinary. A child shifting in her seat. A woman straightening a collar. A glance toward the aisle. Any of it could have meant nothing. That was the cruelty of it. Real danger does not always arrive wearing evidence. Sometimes it arrives wearing manners. The cabin had grown quieter now. Reading lights glowed here and there like small islands. Most passengers had given themselves over to that half-sleep people find on delayed flights when the body is too tired to rest properly and too trapped to do anything else. But Alice was still awake, still upright, still carefully arranged inside herself. I passed their row again and saw that the folder was back in the woman's lap. She rested one hand over it lightly, not guarding it so much as claiming it. Official papers have a strange power over a room. People trust what looks documented. They trust seals, typed pages, names clipped neatly into place. They trust calm adults carrying proof more than they trust children carrying fear. The woman looked up and caught me noticing it. For the first time that night, something colder entered her smile. Not anger. A warning too polished to be called one. Then it vanished. She closed the folder and adjusted the child's sleeve with a care so practiced it looked maternal from a distance. I moved on. A few minutes later, the plane began its descent. Seatbacks clicked upright. Window shades lifted halfway. Passengers stirred and started gathering themselves back into adult shapes. The familiar choreography of arrival took over. Bags checked. Phones awakened. Seatbelts ignored too early. But row 9 did not rush. That struck me immediately. People hiding fear often become either frantic or unusually calm. The woman chose calm. One hand on the folder. One hand at the small of the child's back. Never pushing. Only guiding. Alice stood when she was told. She lifted her little bag without complaint. No dragging. No resistance. No childlike delay. Just obedience so complete it felt less like cooperation than surrender worn smooth. I was held near the rear for a moment by a man struggling with a roller case and a woman insisting the overhead bin had caught her scarf. By the time I cleared them and looked forward again, row 9 was already moving with the slow line toward the exit. The woman never turned around. Alice did, only once. Over her shoulder, it was not a plea. That would have been easier. It was something harder to live with. She looked at me the way a person looks at a witness. They do not expect to be brave, only accurate, as if all she wanted now was to know whether anyone would remember her correctly after the doors opened. Then she faced forward and disappeared into the line. By the time the aircraft emptied, the adrenaline had nowhere to go. That is another thing people do not understand. When you cannot act at the moment action feels possible, the body keeps searching for a later version of courage. I stayed behind under the excuse of helping with the final cabin check. Seat pockets, blankets, forgotten chargers, loose cups. The ordinary archaeology of a finished flight. Their row was almost unnaturally neat. A folded blanket, an empty cup, no scattered wrappers, no dropped toy, no visible sign that a child had occupied the seat at all. For one absurd moment, I thought that was the final insult, that they had left nothing behind, because some people move through the world erasing themselves as carefully as they erase others. Then I saw it, path wedged between the seat frame and the wall beneath the window. A narrow adhesive strip torn from a child's luggage tag. Most people would have missed it. It had curled inward on itself, white side tucked away, as if even that tiny thing had learned not to be seen. I bent down and peeled it free. It stuck lightly to my glove before coming away. For a second, I only stared at the blank side. Then I turned it over, and the whole night narrowed into a single line of print. Alice Wren, not Anna. Alice Wren, printed cleanly, deliberately, not scribbled by a child, not half torn beyond recognition, clear enough to remove doubt and terrible enough to make doubt feel like its own kind of guilt. I stood there for a long moment with the tag in my hand and the empty aircraft breathing around me, cooling metal, faint ticking in the walls, the distant noise of baggage carts somewhere below. Alice Wren. The woman had known. That was the part that changed everything. She had not been mistaken. She had not been improvising. She had been replacing the name on purpose, one repetition at a time, as if identity were something small enough to be trained out of a child before anyone listening closely enough could stop it. A printed name should have made things simpler. Instead, it made them worse, because now the lie had edges. Now I could see its shape, the folder, the custody language, the phrase about visits, the calm explanations, the careful use of Anna every time the child seemed closest to being seen. It had all been arranged, not to convince the child, to convince the room. And somewhere in that arrangement was a cruelty colder than anger. I looked back at the seat where she had sat, upright and silent, defending herself with almost nothing left but a correction. I'm not Anna. I'm Alice. It had sounded so small when she said it, but standing there with the tag in my hand, I understood that it had not been small at all. It had been a line held under pressure. A child trying to keep one true thing from being taken. I wish I could tell you that finding the tag gave me a clear next step. That truth became immediate the moment it had something printed on it. That all uncertainty ended there. But that is not how these things work. By the time I found her name, the child was already gone. Down the jet bridge, into the terminal, back inside whatever adult story had been prepared for her before she ever stepped onto my aircraft. I stood in that empty row holding a piece of torn paper that weighed almost nothing, and yet it felt heavier than any report I had signed that year. Alice Wren. The name stayed in my hand like proof, an accusation, because a child had told me the truth plainly, not dramatically, not desperately, plainly. And the calmer voice beside her had nearly carried the lie safely to the ground. That is what has stayed with me all these years. Not only that I may have failed to act soon enough, but how easy it almost was for the room to accept the wrong version. A pressed blouse, an even tone, a folder full of documents, the right phrases offered at the right moment, custody, adjustment, consistency, words that sound responsible enough to lower every guard in sight. People like to believe danger arrives loudly. They imagine raised voices, visible bruises, a child sobbing openly in the aisle. Something undeniable. Something that lets everyone decent feel certain and brave at the same time. But some of the worst things I have ever witnessed came wrapped in perfect manners, in polished sentences, and the confidence of an adult who understands that if she sounds reasonable enough, A child's truth begins to seem fragile by comparison. That woman did not need to drag Alice anywhere. She only needed to make the rest of us doubt what we had heard. And for a terrible stretch of time, that almost worked. I finished my duties that night the way I always did. I answered questions. I smiled when required. I checked forms. I walked through the terminal with the other crew under fluorescent light that made everyone look thinner and more exhausted than they were. But I was not really there. Part of me was still in row 9, still hearing the difference between the name the woman used and the one the child defended. Anna, Alice. One name spoken with authority, the other spoken with ownership. I thought then, and I still think now, that what broke my heart was not only the fear in her, it was the discipline, the way she had already learned to protect herself in silence, the way she measured every word before spending it, the way she understood, long before any of us did, that truth by itself is not always enough when the wrong adult is holding the story. I do not know where she went after that night. I do not know who met her on the other side of that arrival. I do not know whether anyone later asked her the question that should have mattered from the beginning. What does your mother call you? What does your grandmother call you? What name belongs to the people who know you without paperwork? Maybe someone did ask. Maybe no one did. Maybe the documents won. Maybe the calm won. Maybe the child was expected, once again, to adjust herself to whatever the adults in charge had decided was easier to formalize. That uncertainty is its own kind of punishment, because the mind keeps trying to invent a better ending when none was given. For a long time, I told myself that what haunted me was hesitation. That if I had been braver, faster, less afraid of being wrong, I might have changed everything. Maybe that is true. Or maybe I flatter myself by imagining I held that much power in the first place. The deeper wound is harder to live with. It is this. She was not asking me to solve her whole life. She was asking for something smaller and perhaps more sacred. She was asking me not to let her disappear while I was looking directly at her, to hear her name, to hold it steady, to refuse the edit. I think that is why this flight never left me. Not because it was the loudest, not because it was the most dramatic, but because almost nothing happened in a way the world likes to recognize. No scene, no struggle, no clean villainy, only a child correcting one word, and an adult trying very gently to take even that from her. There are flights I remember because of storms, flights I remember because of medical emergencies, flights I remember because passengers panicked and everyone was forced to become honest at once. And then there are the flights I remember because control never cracked. Those are the dangerous ones, the ones where harm travels in a straight line through a sealed cabin and never once raises its voice. The ones where everyone nearby can later say they saw nothing unmistakable. The ones where a child tells the truth and the truth is almost too quiet to survive. I have carried many faces with me from the sky. Most of them blur with time. Hers never did. Not because she begged, not because she cried, but because she insisted. Because when the world around her was already beginning to rename her, she still found the strength to say no. I'm not Anna. I'm Alice. That was not confusion. That was resistance. Small, precise, costly. And I have come to believe that sometimes the bravest thing a child can do is protect the last true word she still has. So if memory is all I have left to offer her, then memory will have to be enough. Not the woman's version, not the Fuller's version, not the easier version, the child's, the quiet girl in row 9 who knew exactly who she was, even while someone beside her was trying to make the rest of us forget. Not Anna. Alice.